Moth Journal, Paul McMichael, Buchanan, Michigan, September 1988. My first outing was pretty uneventful. I caught only a few small common night flyers, cutworms, underwings, tent caterpillars, but I put them in jars with chlorocresol and showed them to Mrs. Shelton this morning, and she seemed excited for me. Under the microscope, I saw with my own eyes the many hidden colors in these ordinary wings. Brown isn't just brown. It's purple, pink, yellow, orange. Hundreds of colors are hiding in those tiny wings. Indian summer is starting, and I will try again. Big flyers this time, sardinids and noctinae, but Abe and his homework have me pretty busy until the weekend, so I will have to wait until Friday. Somewhere in one of Mrs. Shelton's books, I read that some famous lepidopterist declared that the Spanish moon moth, same family as the Luna, to be the most beautiful moth in the world. I looked at pictures of moon moths and Lunas and compared them. The male moon moth has dramatically tailing hindwings, tails, and also a thick furry body. But what is most dramatic about it is that the veins on its huge wings are strongly outlined in dark brown. And the eye spots, almost an eyeball, perfectly round and unblinking. But the Atticus luna is so unique in color, that pale iridescent green, so beautiful. No, I'm not sure of it. The Riverside luna, long-tailed, broad-combed, emerald green, is the most beautiful. The Atlas moth of China has the largest wingspan, an impossible 12 inches, and the huge owl moth of India has a wing pattern resembling the face of an enormous owl. All over the world there are gigantic moths, the mighty hawk moths of Australia, Canada, and China, the emerald moths of Japan and Africa, the hairy bombyx of India, all of them there, and secretly flying through the trees in moonlight. Chapter 5, Fences. The next morning it was raining when I got to Riverside, so Abe declared it an official office organization day. I found myself trapped indoors with the last person on earth I wanted to be alone with. I started humming to myself to block out the fact that I was stuck with her, and once I noticed that my humming annoyed her, I was all the more inspired. For her listening pleasure, I started enthusiastically humming the Creedence Clearwater classic, Proud Mary. "Knock it off," she snarled. "It's one of your dad's favorites," I reminded her helpfully. I started humming again, getting louder as I got into the rolling on a river part, until she completely cracked. "Stop it!" she screamed, covering her ears. She slammed the file cabinet drawer shut with a crash. "God, you stupid freak! No wonder why you don't have any friends." That word again. But this time I stayed calm. "I have friends," I insisted. "Lots of friends. But I've been devoting all my time to helping Abe this summer. Something you wouldn't understand." "Oh, I understand. I think there's even an expression for it. It's called loser." "Not quite," I replied evenly. "A loser is more like somebody who runs away from home and nobody even cares." It was several moments before Nora even blinked. Then she grabbed the nearest thing on Abe's desk, which happened to be an old pencil holder full of pencils, and heaved it at me. I covered my head, pens and pencils flew around me, and the holder crashed against the wall. I was staring at her, open-mouthed, wondering what she would do next, when Abe poked his head back into the office. "What's going on in here?" he asked, frowning at me. "I just dropped some pencils, Uncle Abe," Nora said, daring me with her eyes to contradict her. She began calmly picking up ones closest to her. "You know what, Abe?" I said. "I don't care if it's raining outside. I think I need to get out of this office." "The rain is letting up, actually." Abe looked out the window. "I have to drive into town for my meeting, but why don't the two of you drive out to the north edge of the prairie? I've been meaning to get some fence posts set in out there all week." I made a desperate, pleading face. Please don't send me out with her. But Abe had already decided. "I'll get the digger and some posts and put them in the back of your truck, Pete." One final plea. "Abe, she has no experience?" Behind me, Nora scoffed. "Oh yeah, Mr. Experience." "Hey, come on, you two," Abe said. "Stop arguing and get out here. Look, It's totally stopped raining. Go on, get some fresh air, both of you. As I left the room to help Abe load the back of my truck, I glanced over one shoulder and saw that Nora had lowered her head and was clutching her hands together. Maybe also preparing for the ordeal of being alone with me in the truck. I wasn't sure. But when she'd settled herself in the passenger side of my truck, she said crisply, "Sorry I called you a loser back there." Her apology caught me off guard. I replied gruffly, "Sorry I said that other thing." She smiled, but it was a forced smile. She was making a phony effort to be nice. What's she after? I wondered. We headed in silence for the north edge of the prairie. It did feel instantly better to be outside, tooling my truck down a narrow path that cut through the prairie. The sky was breaking up, the rain changing to a light mist, and patches of blue beginning to show through the clouds. A wet prairie has the most incredible smell, bergamot, heather, and clean mud. I looked over at Nora and saw that she was taking in the view, still calm. She pointed to the bird perched in a tulip tree and announced, "Phoebe!" I couldn't hide my surprise. She began pointing to other birds, nuthatch, chickadee, bluebird, naming them easily. Could she have learned this much already? "Where did you learn the names of birds?" I asked suspiciously. "Field biology," she announced. "Aced it last year. Surprised?" I didn't answer. She studied my profile as I drove, staring hard and long enough to make me uncomfortable. "So I was wondering, Pete," she said finally, calling me by my name for the first time. "How did my grandmother ever get rich enough to buy all this property in the first place?" I had to think about this for a moment, to try and recall how this had been explained to me. "Her name was Eleonora." "Hey, I guess you were named after her, right?" "Nobody calls me Eleonora," she insisted, the edge back in her voice. Then cheerful again, too cheerful. "So how did Eleonora get enough money to buy Riverside?" "She and my gram were best friends." "Interesting. So how did she get rich?" "Well, she became a nurse around the same time my gram became a teacher. And I think I heard something once about her making all these really smart investments and having money nobody knew about until just before she died." "Wow, nobody knew she had money? That's just so interesting." The falseness of her voice was really getting to me. I almost preferred her rudeness. I pulled the truck to a stop at the prairie's edge, and then it was my turn to stare at her. "Yeah, it's real interesting," I repeated, mocking her tone. "Why don't you just tell me what you want to know?" She looked away, frustrated. "Maybe it's not so easy, having to find out this stuff from you." "Fine, agreed. It's not easy. I'm just saying you don't have to put on an act." She was still looking at me directly. I noticed her right hand, which had settled on the dashboard of my truck. Her fingers were long and thin, and her nails weren't bitten down anymore. She saw me looking at her fingers and began to slowly drum them on the dashboard. The sound was surprisingly loud in the silent cab of my truck. "God, I'm already sweaty," she said, "and we're not even outside yet." "I can take you back if you're not up to it." I was trying to be gallant, but she took instant offense. I said I was hot. I didn't say I wasn't up to it. I sighed, opened my door, and hopped out ahead of her, not wanting to lapse back into an argument. "Let's get moving, then." "Don't start bossing me. God, I don't need you telling me what to do out here." "Oh, so you already know what to do with the post diggers? You're an expert on that, too?" It was all downhill after that. I tried to show her how to handle the post hole digger, how to set it right in the dirt, how far to push it down. It isn't difficult, but there's a certain way it has to be done. Nora balked at every suggestion. I'd never worked with anybody so unwilling to take the slightest instruction. "Just let me do it," she kept insisting, pushing me out of the way with her hips and then doing it wrong. Then I would show her again, and she would act as though it was my fault that she wasn't getting it right. Finally, after we'd been working on the same hole for 10 minutes, I lost my temper. "Damn it, if you'd just listen to me for once," I yelled. Nora looked for a moment like her head would explode. She flung the digger away from her. I watched it fall into the dirt, ruining the hole. "Fine," she cried. "Do it yourself." We were eye to eye. Mosquitoes were hovering around our sweaty faces. "Why is it so hard," I asked Lily, "for you to accept that I know more about how things work around here than you do?" Why is it so hard, she asked back evenly, for you to stop treating me like I'm too stupid to dig a friggin' hole? Nobody ever said you were stupid, I said, although you're acting pretty stupid today. You think just because you work for my uncle you're my boss or something? Get over yourself, Shelton. This place is the Paul McMichael Nature Center, remember? I'm Nora McMichael. She paused and stuck out her chin, wearing a mean smile, savoring a new thought. Matter of fact, you work for me. My jaw fell. That's crazy. My grandparents owned all of this before you even... Oh, please, your grandparents? They're not even your real grandparents. They're just two old people who adopted you. I couldn't hide my surprise that she knew this. Oh, yeah? I heard all about it, she went on. You and your pathetic story. My pathetic story? I repeated. My pathetic story? You're the one who thinks you're some kind of charity case just because your dad was Paul McMichael. Hey, at least I know who my dad was. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We were nose to nose again. I lowered my head for a long moment, struggling to control my dismay that Abe had ignored my instructions not to tell her anything about me. Yeah, I know all about your sad little life, Nora added. Abe said it's why you're so awful to work with. As soon as she said this, a calm came over me. I turned as cold as a stone, because I knew, as well as I know my own name, that whatever Abe had told this girl, he would never, ever have described me as awful to work with. Not Abe, who had taught me the names of every bird and flower and insect in Michigan, and who had taught me how to ride and bike and climb a tree and row a canoe. Nora was lying about Abe. I took a step closer to her and pointed a finger calmly at the top button of her blouse. You think you know anything about me? Well, here's what I know about you, bitch. You're basically homeless. Nobody calls, nobody wants you back. You gambled and lost, and now you've got nothing. Nora whacked my finger away from her shirt, but I wasn't finished. And you're not going to guilt trip me or manipulate me the way you do Abe. I don't care who you are. I don't care who your dad was. I don't care what you think you know. You sure as hell don't know me. So you can quit trying to mess things up between me and Abe. Got that? Understand? I called her bluff, and she knew it. She took a wobbly step backwards, and then turned and started off on what I happened to know would be a very long and treacherous walk back to the office. Want a ride? I yelled, knowing that she would not turn around. I watched her furious strides with great satisfaction, knowing that she didn't know what she was getting into, walking through the June prairie. She would soon be navigating wicked brush, deep mud, mosquitoes, chiggers, needle-sharp burrs, and poison ivy. A nice nature hike for a city girl. Who was I to stop her? The next day, Abe came into the office with a long face, made coffee without speaking to me, brought a cup to my desk, and then stood in front of me with his arms crossed, waiting for me to speak. I took a sip and kept silent, making him go first. Okay, what happened out on the prairie yesterday? He asked. I fired a question right back. Why did you tell Nora I was adopted? This surprised and flustered him. Because you are adopted, Pete. Abe, you know I don't like to talk about that, and I don't like strangers knowing my business. She's not a stranger. She's family now. And she asked me about you. She wanted to know why you're my assistant. Then she asked why you live with your grandparents. I didn't think it would be a big deal for me to tell her that Ida and Conrad adopted you. Yeah, well, it is a big deal. Did you say something to her about my dad? Abe looked bewildered. Pete, what would I say? I don't know anything about your dad. She said something to me about not having a dad, or not knowing my dad. I don't know how she would have known that, Pete. She might have been purely guessing. As he said it, I realized it was probably true, and I felt foolish for bringing it up. Just don't tell her anything else about me, okay? Not one word. She'll just use it against me. This brought Abe back to his original concern. So what were you two fighting about yesterday? He asked. When I didn't answer, he went on. She walked by herself all the way back to the office, Pete. It took her like 2 hours. She got stung by a hornet on one knee, and she has poison ivy on both legs. I struggled not to laugh out loud. Hey, I offered her a ride back. It was her choice to walk. Where is she anyway? She's a mess. I told her to stay home. And you're saying this is my fault? My fault she has a temper tantrum on the prairie and totally bails on the fence post? My fault she doesn't know how to do anything and starts screaming at me and calling me names every time I try to give her the simplest directions? You should have never let her walk back by herself. You should have stopped her. Stopped her? Have you noticed how well she listens to me? Why did you have to send us out there together in the first place? Keep her out of my way if you're so worried about her. I was shouting. The realization of this made me catch my breath and grit my teeth and look away. When I looked back at Abe, I saw an equally shocked expression on his face. We were having our first real argument. Bella burst into the middle of it. Pete, hurry! She cried. Mom found a baby fox on the side of the road. We think it got hit by a car. It has a broken leg. Come on! I looked back at Abe. Go on with her, he instructed softly. We'll talk about this later. I spent the rest of the morning avoiding him, hanging out with Bella and dealing with our Fondly, a baby fox with an injured right paw, dehydrated and very weak, too weak to resist handling. I knew a few basics about veterinarian science from Gramps. He had been Buchanan's only vet for nearly 30 years. With Bella's help, I anesthetized the cub, cleaned and bandaged his wound, and settled her into a metal cage so that we could keep an eye on the healing process for a day or two. We named her Candy, the Latin name for the family of foxes, wolves, and dogs. We called her Candy for short, which Bella loved. She asked if she could use my wood burning kit to make a sign for the cage that said Candy, and I showed her how to do it. She hung on every word of my instructions and was handling the wood burner like a pro by the end of the morning. At noon, I was eating my lunch on the porch of the visitor center with Christina when Nora came riding through the parking lot on Abe's bicycle, Thor galloping happily behind her. Abe was planting beach grass along the walkway to the center, and I watched his face as Nora approached, saw that it pleased him that she had come to Riverside on her own. He gave her a two-handed welcoming wave. She hopped off the bike, guiding it along the walkway and leaning it up against the porch. Thor bounded up to me, and I put my arms around him, slapping his flanks. Nora came up the steps behind Abe in her baggy overalls, a powerful whiff of calamine coming with her. I couldn't hold back a smirk at the smell and lowered my head into Thor's coat to hide it. But not quickly enough. Nora leaned down slightly as she passed by to whisper, "Trust me, I'll get you back." Christina, sitting beside me in one of the Adirondack porch chairs, didn't hear. She'd been watching Abe. Wow, did you see Abe's face light up when that girl rode in? He's one lucky man, I said sarcastically, but Christina didn't catch it. He sure seems to like having Nora around. This I couldn't let go by. Yeah, well, it's not like he has much of a choice. What do you mean? I mean, like 3 weeks ago, she just shows in the middle of the night and announces she's homeless. What else could he do? Christina's mouth dropped. That's how Nora came to Buchanan? Oh, yeah. He had no idea she was coming. No warning. That first week, he didn't know what to do with her. Christina sat back, digesting the information. Wow, it's working out awfully well, if that's how it started. He's trying to make the best of it, I conceded, because she's, the famous Paul McMichael's daughter. Christina took a thoughtful bite out of her egg sandwich. I knew him, the famous Paul McMichael. I was surprised. You knew Abe's brother? Well, I didn't know him, but I sure remember him. We all went to the same high school here in Buchanan. Does Abe know you remember Paul? She shrugged. I mentioned right away that I grew up here, but I've been kind of waiting for him to ask me if I knew Paul. Doesn't it seem like something he'd want to know about me? You know how he is, I pointed out. He doesn't ask questions. Not of me, anyway. So what do you remember about Paul McMichael? I asked, curious to hear a new perspective. She tipped her head back against the wood slates of the chair and closed her eyes. He was a few years ahead of me in school, a senior, I think, when I was still a sophomore. But it was a very small high school. Way fewer kids back then, and everybody knew everybody. And Paul was the sort of guy you notice. He was really something. I think he was my Gram's all-time favorite student, a science genius. Oh, well, yeah, he was obviously smart, but that's not what I mean. He was so handsome. Movie star handsome. Curly red blonde hair and the most beautiful blue eyes. A little mysterious. I knew several girls who had big crushes on him from afar. He became kind of a loner, though, once he got in the whole moth collecting science scholarship thing. And then he got married so young, barely out of high school, right after he inherited this place. So you were still around here when he got married? She nodded. I was a senior in high school the year he was killed. It was so tragic, unbelievably tragic. Front page in all the papers, and lots of people I knew went to his funeral. I couldn't bring myself to go. I couldn't make any sense out of the idea of him dead, and that little baby born right after. Plus, I was dying to leave Buchanan, start my new life, and never come back. Or so I thought. Now here I am, 15 years later, back in my hometown with my daughter, helping Paul McMichael's kid brother build his nature center on the St. Joe River and meeting Nora McMichael. She sighed. Life is so full of twists and turns, Pete. You just wait. She took another bite of her sandwich, finished with talking, but there was something else I wanted to ask her. I hesitated a moment, searching for the best way to frame a question that might sound negative. How could somebody like Paul have a daughter like Nora? Does Nora seem like her dad to you? I asked. Just at this moment, Abe and Nora came out of the office together and passed us, heading for the parking lot. Christina put a hand up to shield her eyes from the sun and stared at their receding backs, one broad, one narrow. There is something, Christina decided. Something about the way she carries herself. An intensity, and I suspect she's a loner too, but she's different from her father. Not as sure of herself. People loved Paul. I don't think Nora's had much experience with people just purely loving her. That's quite a difference. Know what I mean? Pete, Bella called, running toward us from the animal hospital. Come quick! Candy is awake and she's trying to chew her bandage off. To the rescue, Superman, Christina said, lifting her hands and shooing me away. The same day I drove my truck back to the prairie and finished putting in half a dozen fence posts left over from yesterday. It was important to me to be able to point out to Abe that I was the one who had gone back to the scene of the crime and finished the job. It was hotter than yesterday, and I came back to the office in a sweat, but with a feeling of righteousness. Who worked harder at Riverside than Pete Shelton? Who organized everything, repaired anything, kept things moving? When I got back, Abe was in his office on the phone, and Christina was in the kitchen, washing mugs. I went to ask where Bella was, but heard Bella's piping voice rising from the basement stairs. Oh, he's just an amazing artist. I'm not kidding. He can draw anything. He's going to draw all these moths. Then I heard another voice, asking an out-of-earshot question, and I realized with some alarm that Bella and Nora were in my workshop. He didn't find them here, Nora. He found them at the cabin. They belonged to his brother. The one who died? Oops, I guess that was your dad. A brief silence, then a series of new sounds. Clattering wood and metal, objects being moved around. Bella's voice was suddenly anxious. Why are you doing that, Nora? Nora, leave those alone. Those are Pete's. And then pleading, are you mad, Nora? Why are you getting so mad? My moths. I flew down the stairs and found that Nora was standing at my drafting table, carelessly piling the moth cases back into the metal box, causing them to clank and clatter against each other. Get away from those, I cried in alarm. They belong to me. Leave them alone. But she turned her back and tossed 3 more cases into the box, roughly, as if they were made of plastic. Something inside of me snapped. Those are fragile, you idiot, I cried. She picked up 2 more, and I lunged across the room to grab her arms from behind. When she flailed out of my arms and turned to face me, one of the cases dropped and shattered on the concrete floor. Bella put a hand on either side of her and howled, Stop it! You're breaking them! Get back! Nora screamed, or I'll break them all! I swear I will! We heard footsteps on the basement stairs, and Abe came barreling into the room, Christina close behind him. What's going on down here? He cried. Bella said these were my dad's, Nora said, pointing to the half-dozen cases still on the table. Is it true? I didn't know she would get so mad about it, Bella wailed. The Cecropia, I managed to say. I fell to my knees beside the shattered case on the basement floor. Nora shook the surviving moth case in Abe's face. My father had a moth collection and you just gave it away without even telling me? It was all before you came, Nora, Abe said. I looked up at him and he gave me a helpless, trapped look. Nora turned to Christina, who was holding Bella at her side. Did you know about this too, Christina? She asked. Did everyone but me know my dad had a moth collection? Christina replied calmly. None of us realized it would matter to you so much, honey. Matter to me? Nora wailed. Matter to me? I have nothing from my dad. Nothing. She stared at the case that was still in her hand, a yellow imperial. I didn't know anything about him. I thought he was a loser. I thought that's why my mom wouldn't talk about him. Nora, Christina said gently, we're so very sorry you thought that. Your father was a wonderful, gifted man, but you're upset. Why don't we go upstairs and I'll make some cocoa and we can all calm down a little. Nobody moved. Christina announced more firmly, Bella and I are going upstairs. She turned and led Bella away. I began retrieving the broken case from the floor. The Cecropia was still pinned to the backing, but covered now with slivers of glass. One wing was torn under the eye spot. With my fingers, I started picking up the larger pieces of glass, carefully, slowly, so as not to cut myself. Abe and Nora were still talking above me as though I wasn't there anymore. Or maybe I wasn't there. I felt like I had disappeared along with Bella and Christina. I heard Abe say, as though from far away, I'll make it right, Nora. Please don't cry. And then I heard the crushing, rumpling sounds that meant Abe had embraced Nora. I picked up another shard of glass. Above my head came Nora's voice, muffled by Abe's embrace. They're mine. They're mine. They're mine. Half an hour later, Bella appeared in the doorway of my workshop. You coming up? She asked. Mom made cocoa for you. Are they gone? Yeah, they went back to the cabin. It's all my fault, Pete. I should have never brought her down here. I don't know why I did it. I wanted to show her something that proved you're a genius. Through my dismay, I had to smile. Right, I said. You proved I'm a genius. Now she's going to make Abe give her all the moths. How can he do that? Aw, they're just a bunch of dead moths, Bella. Who cares what happens to them? Bella wrung her hands. Why did I ever bring her down here? She would have found them eventually. She's always snooping around, looking for something else to get mad about. She doesn't deserve them, Bella pronounced. She doesn't know anything about moths. She's ignorant. I put an arm around Bella's shoulder. Did somebody say something about cocoa? We made it with whole milk, Bella said adoringly. Just the way you like it. She gave me her most radiant girl smile, and for a moment, it almost helped me to climb out of the deep, ugly hole I had fallen into. It almost did.